Okay, people. I wanted to start a series about weird little drum beats because we need to appreciate these beats more. I had a teacher at NEC named Anthony Coleman who's amazing, and he told me to focus more on the anomaly. He thought I was too concerned with you know, trying to figure out what a thing is, whether it's like a genre of music or a song idea or something like that, with trying to figure out like the essence, like the core thing. And he thought I would benefit from focusing more on the anomaly, on the weird part of it, on the part that doesn't like quite fit, because there's maybe even more to be learned from that. And at any rate, it's kind of freeing to not be so concerned with what a thing is or isn't. And focusing more on like the quirky specifics of each individual like piece. Anyway, so with that in mind, weird little drum beats. That's what we're gonna do. Also, like the longer I play drums, the more I just get like really interested in like the weird beats because, drum beats are really cool. Like they're both like really abstract, but also really physical and like simple. So I just think it's a cool thing. Anyway, the first beat that I wanted to do. Also, I got this cool setup with, well, it's not that cool, but like I finally figured out how to put my camera so you can kind of see. Well, you can just see my hi-hat, but that's kind of all you need to see because the hi-hat is great. These are from the 50s. Isn't that cool? Anyway, so the first beat I wanted to do is called Look Around. It's a song by Femi Kuti, who's the eldest son of Fela Kuti, the creator of Afrobeat. It's on this album Shoki Shoki, which is, in my opinion, the greatest Afrobeat album that Tony Allen doesn't play on. Tony Allen was Fela Kuti's drummer, and my favorite drummer of all time. And usually when people play Afrobeat, if you're not Tony Allen and you're playing Afrobeat, usually it sounds stupid. But this drummer on this Shoki Shoki album by Femi Kuti is, I think, really great. His name is Tosin Aribisala. He's like a young guy, which is also cool because Tony was really old. Well, at this point, he was really old. He died last year. But anyway, there was like a big open spot for like young Afrobeat drummers who actually sound good. And this guy Tosin Aribisala has filled it. So what is there to say? The album is great. He's a really different drummer than Tony Allen, which is cool also that he's able to like capture this, what I hear as like the spirit of Afrobeat without copying Tony Allen. Maybe I'll try to play this beat as he plays it, and then how I feel like Tony would have played it, because that could be kind of cool. All right, so I'll play the beat and then we'll talk about it. Here we go. That's all it is. Deceptively simple. I mean, it's simple, but it's weird. Yeah, it's simple, but it's weird. All right, let's break it down. So, Afrobeat, usually it's gonna be what I think of as like an asymmetric beat. It's not gonna be like where it's like 2 and 4 on the snare, and there's a regular kind of down, up kind of rhythm. It's usually a little messed up. Like this would be a standard Afrobeat beat. Like you might have, 2 and 4, you might have 2 or 4 hit, and then the other one is kind of offbeat. And usually the bass drum is somewhere around 1 and 3. Maybe 1 out of every like 5 beats that Tony played, you wouldn't have the bass drum on 1. You might have something like something like that. But even though that might sound just as weird as the look around beat, to me it's more like kind of classic like Afrobeat. This beat is so strange. So let's break it down. So number one, the hi-hat. Tony Allen's big innovation was opening and closing the hi-hat. He would close it on the ands, on the offbeats. That was like his big thing. He came up playing, this is just turning into a whole history lesson, but that's fine. So he came up playing High Life, which is like pop music of like Nigeria and Ghana in the like 50s and 60s. And those beats usually sounded like this. They sounded like... four on the floor with the kick drum, some kind of like marching snare thing with that type of rhythm. And when Tony was coming up, he added the hi-hat on the offbeats like this. I don't know how well the audio is coming through, but basically it just adds like a little bounce and lightness, which to me is like Tony Allen's main contribution to like drumming, to the world of like rhythm, is that kind of bounce. But the interesting thing is that then when he left Fella's band in like the late 70s or something, around 1980, the later drummers pretty much always would play when they would open the hi-hat, they would play it like a bark, a hi-hat bark they call it, like this. Whereas Tony would play, so here's the difference. As opposed to, right? So was it a deliberate thing, or could they just not figure out how to open it without making that sound? I kind of think it was the former. To hit it and then hit it again while your foot is going is really kind of like a subtle thing. It's really kind of hard to do, especially like regularly. That's why Tony was so amazing. And I kind of feel like these drummers just couldn't do it. Because remember, like at that time, Nigeria in the 80s, like there really wasn't like a whole culture of like drum set players. There was like very few people who could do it. So, and it's not like there were like teachers or schools or anything. It was like a very like rare thing if you were playing drums at that point in Nigeria. Playing drum set. So I kind of think they just were like, okay, well, Tony lifted his foot, but I can't figure out how to do it without making that sound, so I'm just going to make that sound, and it'll work. And it did work because the bands were getting louder, because everything was getting louder in the 80s, and so that kind of like extra sound coming from the hi-hat, really emphasizing the quarter notes, it worked, it was cool. So that's what this guy's doing. And I can't quite hear if he's adding the 16th notes at the end of each beat, or if that's just the shekere, which is like the big gourd with beads that's doing that rhythm. I don't know if it's hi-hat or shekere or both. But anyway, that's what I'm doing. So I'm doing bark and then hit. Right? So that's kind of straightforward. The weird part is the snare and bass. So one more time. So I don't even know how to make heads or tails of this. Why is it that way? And this is why I like it so much. Because, Femi Kuti, this album came out in the 90s at some point, and Femi Kuti was like a god of Afrobeat at this point. Afrobeat wasn't really big globally while Fela was alive. He played like the Berlin Jazz Festival one time, like kind of late in his career, and it was kind of cool, but not really anyone knew about it. Then he died, and everyone was like, holy shit, that guy was amazing. He was buried with an 8-inch joint in his grave, by the way, which I think is cool. 8 inches of weed. Anyway, so then he died, and people were like, holy shit, Fela was amazing. And Femi was just growing up enough at the time to like take over. He took over the band Egypt 80, which was like Fella's last band without Tony Allen. He took over the band and started like touring all over, and it was really big for a minute. Like Afrobeat in the '90s, globally was like maybe the biggest it's ever been. Maybe it's coming back now, but it was really big then. Anyway, so I just think it's so cool that this guy Tosin Aribisala, who was really young at the time, like early 20s maybe, would play such a weird beat in such a big band for Femi Kuti. Like, can you imagine how scary that would be to play a weird Afrobeat beat for the guy whose dad invented Afrobeat? That's like if you were working for like Henry Ford Jr. and you were like, I think this car should have 3 wheels. It's that kind of like boldness, which I respect, and it just makes me happy because it's kind of like, playful, which I think is like fun and usually hard to come by in those like big gig scenarios. So, okay, so why is the beat weird? So the snare's on 1, that's obviously the weirdest thing. The snare's usually not on 1. But that happens sometimes in Afrobeat. Then there's a double on the kick drum, which happens a lot in Afrobeat. That was another one of Tony's big like things that he did a lot that people try to copy, is the double on the bass drum. I think the weirdest thing for me is kind of how straight it is. There's no real like 16th note weirdness or like syncopation. It's just kind of like ba duku ba ba duku ba ba ba. The only thing that makes it at all like offbeat is that he doesn't play on beat 3, right? 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Imagine how bad it would sound if he played on 3. It's terrible. He doesn't play on 3, so it gives it a little bit of lilt. So that's kind of cool. Another thing that I really like is just when the snare is on 1, it means that you start the bars often like with a crash on the snare, which I just think sounds really cool. I just think that's like, it's just so like light and bouncy, so that's cool. I think another part of this beat that like part of the reason that it works, I think, is the way it fits with the guitar and the bass, which is always like what makes Afrobeat drum beats like make sense, is the way that they interlock with the guitar and bass. Which are kind of going like dun 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 like that. So they're kind of doing like, he's kind of like mirroring that, which is what Tony that was Tony's like. I keep saying that's what Tony came up with, but he came up with a lot of stuff. But that was another thing that he came up with, was like that kind of like locking in with the guitar and bass. So this is doing that, but it's just doing it in a really weird way. So I was gonna try to do this beat how I think Tony Allen would have done it. So let me try to think about that. So it sounded like this, maybe. Something like that, very like, not loose, well kind of loose. Anyway, and I don't think he would have done that, the opening there. And he does a lot of that kind of thing, those bounces. As opposed to how Tosin Aribisala does it. Like super, straight and clean kind of thing. But the crazy thing is that it still works. Like usually when Afrobeat is super straight and clean, it sounds stupid. But this, it just feels, it feels really right, even though it's so weird and different. which is the story with this beat in general. Both the style and the content are weird, but I think it really works. What did you think? Let me know in the comments. Goodbye.